Have you ever felt like you were standing in the middle of a crowded room, and yet something inside you whispered, "You don't belong here"? Not because you're shy, not because you dislike people, but because the conversations feel thin, the laughter feels rehearsed, and the world around you seems to be speaking a language you no longer understand. What if your loneliness is not a flaw, but a signal? There are minds that move differently, minds that don't stop at the surface of things, minds that ask questions where others accept answers, and those minds often carry a strange burden. The more they understand, the more isolated they feel, like someone who wakes up in the middle of a dream and realizes everyone else is still asleep. You may have noticed it already. Small moments, awkward silences after you say what you really think, eyes drifting away when you try to talk about meaning, time, fear, or truth. It's as if depth creates distance, as if seeing too clearly pushes you to the edge of the crowd. And here's the unsettling thought. What if this is not accidental? The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer believed that intelligence doesn't just illuminate, it separates. That clarity comes with a cost, that the sharper the mind, the lonelier the path. Not out of arrogance, not because the intelligent reject others, but because they can no longer pretend. They can no longer fully participate in illusions that once felt comforting. This video is not about feeling superior. It's about understanding a quiet pain many people never name. The pain of thinking too much, feeling too deeply, seeing patterns others ignore, and slowly realizing that connection, real connection, has become rare. If any part of this feels uncomfortably familiar, you're not alone, and you might want to stay with this reflection. Consider subscribing, not just to support the channel, but because what we explore here is meant for minds that wander beyond the obvious. Because once you begin to see the world as it is, not as it pretends to be, something irreversible happens inside you. A question forms, a tension grows, and the real mystery is not why intelligent people feel alone, but what that loneliness is trying to reveal about the world you're living in. There is a quiet moment many people experience, but rarely talk about. It doesn't happen in dramatic flashes. It slips in slowly, disguised as coincidence. You wake up from a dream that feels too real. Not symbolic in the usual way, not chaotic. It lingers. The emotions stay with you long after your eyes open. You don't fully understand it, but something inside tells you it mattered. Later that day, a sentence from that dream echoes back in your mind, as if it's waiting to be decoded. Or maybe it's your body that speaks first. A sudden tightness in the chest, with no medical explanation. A wave of fatigue that comes after certain conversations. A strange calm that appears when you're alone and disappears the moment you re-enter social noise. You start noticing patterns. Certain places drain you. Certain people exhaust you. Certain silences heal you. You try to explain it logically. Stress, overthinking, imagination. But deep down, you know that explanation doesn't reach far enough. There are moments when you sense things before they happen. A message that arrives seconds after you thought of someone. An urge to avoid a place that later proves justified. A discomfort around situations that look harmless on the surface. These experiences don't announce themselves loudly, they whisper. And only those who are paying attention hear them. This is where the pain begins. Because when you mention these sensations, the reactions are predictable. Polite smiles, awkward jokes, quick subject changes. You learn, over time, to keep these perceptions to yourself, not because they aren't real, but because the world has no patience for subtle languages. And yet, the signals keep coming. You start feeling out of sync with everyday life. Conversations feel shallow, repetitive. Social rituals feel strangely performative. It's not that you dislike people, it's that something essential feels missing. As if everyone is discussing the surface of the ocean while you're sensing the currents below. This creates a quiet confusion. You wonder if something is wrong with you, if you're becoming distant, if your sensitivity is a weakness. But the more you try to ignore it, the stronger it becomes, like a signal that intensifies when you refuse to listen. Many people reach this point and turn away. They numb themselves. They stay busy. They drown intuition in noise. Others, however, pause and begin to suspect something unsettling. What if these experiences are not random? What if they are not symptoms, but messages? This is where intelligence becomes a double-edged blade. A sharp mind notices patterns. It connects dots. It senses inconsistencies between what is said and what is felt. And once you see those fractures, you cannot unsee them. That's why solitude often grows around intelligent, sensitive people. Not because they reject the world, but because the world doesn't recognize the language they're beginning to hear. If this resonates, even slightly, you may want to subscribe. Not out of habit, but because this space is built for those who feel these questions quietly forming inside them. Because the real mystery is not whether these signs mean something. The real mystery is why some people perceive them so clearly, while others move through life untouched by them. So ask yourself, what if your dreams, your discomfort, your sense of isolation are not distractions from life, but invitations? Invitations to understand something most people never stop long enough to notice. There is a first sign that almost everyone ignores, not because it is rare, but because it is misunderstood. Ancient traditions spoke of it in fragments. Philosophers hinted at it cautiously. Mystics protected it with silence. And modern life has almost erased the language needed to recognize it. The first great spiritual sign is this: a growing intolerance for superficial reality. At first, it doesn't feel spiritual at all. It feels like irritation, fatigue, a quiet sadness you can't fully explain. You lose patience with conversations that go nowhere. You feel drained by routines that once seemed normal. You begin to sense that something essential is missing, but you can't name it. Most people interpret this as boredom, depression, or social exhaustion, but ancient teachings saw it differently. They understood it as the moment when consciousness begins to withdraw its energy from illusion. In Eastern traditions, this was described as the soul loosening its attachment to appearances. In early Greek philosophy, it was seen as the beginning of wisdom, when the mind stops being satisfied with shadows on the wall. Even medieval mystics spoke of a holy discomfort, a restlessness that appears when the inner eye begins to open. Schopenhauer, in his own way, described the same phenomenon. He observed that the more a person understands the mechanics of desire, ambition, and social performance, the less convincing they become. The world starts to feel like a stage play you can no longer enjoy, because you see the strings. This is not cynicism, it is perception. You may notice it when success stories feel hollow, when constant positivity feels dishonest, when pleasure feels temporary, almost mechanical. You may still participate, still smile, still function, but something inside you steps back and watches. This is the first sign: detachment without withdrawal. You are still here, but not fully convinced anymore. And this is where the hidden meaning emerges. Ancient teachings suggest that when this sign appears, consciousness is conserving energy. It is no longer willing to invest fully in what does not nourish it. The mind becomes selective. The heart becomes quieter. The soul begins to ask different questions. This is why solitude often follows, not as punishment, but as protection. When awareness sharpens, noise becomes painful. When perception deepens, shallow engagement feels violent. The nervous system itself begins to reject what is misaligned. This is why certain environments suddenly exhaust you, why certain ambitions lose their grip, why certain relationships feel heavier than they used to. You are not becoming antisocial. You are becoming less divisible. In ancient mystery schools, this stage was never explained publicly. It was said that those who reached it would either turn back, choosing comfort and distraction, or move forward, accepting the strange emptiness that precedes clarity. Because here is the uncomfortable truth. This sign does not feel like enlightenment. It feels like loss. Loss of certainty. Loss of belonging. Loss of easy meaning. But beneath that loss, something else is forming. A different center of gravity. A quieter authority. A mind that no longer asks the world who it should be. If this resonates, if you recognize yourself in this subtle shift, consider marking this moment by liking the video or subscribing, not as a gesture to the platform, but as a way of stepping into a small, quiet circle of people who are willing to look beneath appearances. Because once this first sign appears, it does not disappear. The only question is, what happens when you stop fighting it? And allow it to reveal what it has been preparing you to see. There was a period in my life when silence became louder than noise. From the outside, everything looked normal. Work was getting done. Conversations were happening. Days passed as they always had. But internally, something had shifted. It felt as if a thin veil had been lifted, and once lifted, it refused to fall back into place. I remember one specific evening. The city was restless. Cars passing, distant voices, screens glowing through windows. I was sitting alone, watching the light fade from the walls, and suddenly a strange thought appeared, uninvited but precise. I no longer recognized the world I'm living in. Not in anger, not in despair, just clarity. It wasn't loneliness in the usual sense. I wasn't craving company. I was craving truth, and the absence of it felt heavier than being alone ever could. Around that time, conversations began to change. Friends spoke about goals, plans, achievements, but their words felt oddly hollow, like echoes in an empty room. I noticed myself listening less, not out of arrogance, but out of fatigue. Explaining how I felt required translating something subtle into a language that had no words for it. At night, the dreams began. Not chaotic dreams, but lucid ones. Repetitive, symbolic. Doors that wouldn't open. Long corridors. Watching crowds move in one direction while I stood still. I would wake up with a calm tension in my chest, as if the dream had not ended, only paused. Then came the physical sensations. A pressure behind the eyes when I forced myself into situations that felt misaligned. A strange lightness when I withdrew. moments of deep calm in solitude, followed by unease in places full of stimulation. My body was responding before my mind could justify it. I tried to ignore it, to push through, to be normal. But the more I resisted, the stronger the signals became. One day, during a routine walk, I noticed something that changed everything. People rushing past, faces locked into urgency, phones glowing like small altars in their hands. And suddenly it was clear, not intellectually, but viscerally, that most people were not present. They were occupied, distracted, running from something unnamed. And I realized that what I had been feeling wasn't rejection of the world. It was disidentification. That realization didn't bring comfort. It brought grief. Because with it came the understanding that going back was no longer possible. Once you see the mechanisms, desire chasing desire, noise masking emptiness, you can't unsee them. The old ways of belonging stop working. The laughter feels delayed. The enthusiasm feels borrowed. And yet, within that grief, something else emerged, a quiet strength, a sense that solitude was no longer punishment, but initiation. I began reading differently, listening differently, choosing silence not as escape, but as alignment. Slowly, the anxiety softened. The need to explain faded. I stopped trying to be understood by everyone and began understanding myself. If any part of this story feels familiar, it's not coincidence. Many people experience moments like these and dismiss them. They medicate them, distract themselves from them, or worse, judge themselves for feeling out of place. But what if these moments are thresholds? What if they are signs that something within you is reorganizing? If this kind of reflection resonates with you, subscribing isn't just support. It's a way of staying connected to a space where these experiences are taken seriously, not minimized. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt this quiet separation from the world you once fit into? Have you experienced dreams, sensations, or realizations that made you feel both clearer and more alone at the same time? Share your experience in the comments. I read them carefully, and some of these stories may be woven into future reflections because no one walks this path entirely alone. The question that remains is unsettling and necessary. If this separation is not a mistake, then what is it preparing you for? There is a second great spiritual secret, and this one is easier to recognize, yet far more difficult to accept. The first sign separated you from illusions. The second sign confronts you with your own inner resistance. This sign appears when you realize that solitude is no longer just something that happens to you. It becomes something you need. And that realization can be unsettling. You begin to notice that your deepest clarity arrives not when you are distracted, but when you are alone. Not scrolling, not talking, not consuming, but sitting quietly, sometimes uncomfortably, with your own thoughts. At first, this silence feels empty, even threatening, but slowly, something else emerges beneath it. A kind of inner order. Ancient teachings describe this as the moment when the mind stops looking outward for confirmation and begins listening inward for alignment. In mystical traditions, this was called turning the gaze inward. In philosophy, it was described as autonomy of thought. Schopenhauer would have called it withdrawal from the tyranny of the will, the endless wanting, chasing, proving. This is the second sign. Your discomfort with silence fades, and your discomfort with noise increases. You may notice that constant stimulation now exhausts you. Social media feels invasive. Endless opinions feel heavy. Even well-meaning conversations begin to feel intrusive if they lack depth. It's not that you've become fragile. It's that your perception has sharpened. This sign is often misinterpreted as antisocial behavior or emotional coldness. But in reality, it's the nervous system recalibrating. It's consciousness learning to protect itself. Here's the hidden meaning most people never hear. When this sign appears, your inner world is becoming more real to you than the external performance of life. And this is where a practical key becomes essential, because without guidance, this stage can slide into isolation, bitterness, or emotional withdrawal. So here is a simple but powerful technique to apply immediately. Once a day, intentionally choose 10 minutes of deliberate silence. No music, no phone, no meditation app, no intention to fix anything. Sit comfortably. Let your thoughts move freely. Do not chase them, and do not push them away. Simply observe what arises when there is no audience, no expectation, no role to play. At first, your mind will resist. It will produce noise, memories, urgency, random thoughts. This is normal. Stay with it. Then notice something subtle. Beneath the mental chatter, there is often a quieter layer, a presence that feels stable, observant, almost untouched. That presence does not argue. It does not rush. It does not need validation. That is the part of you that solitude is trying to introduce you to. This practice is not about becoming detached from the world. It's about becoming anchored. When you regularly touch this inner stillness, your relationship with solitude changes. It stops feeling like exile and starts feeling like orientation. You begin to choose interactions more consciously. You speak less, but more truthfully. You listen differently. You stop trying to fill silence and start allowing it to speak. This is why ancient wisdom emphasized inner discipline over external belonging. Because once you stabilize internally, loneliness loses its power to wound you. But here is where the mystery deepens. There is a third sign, far more rare, far more intense, that appears only after this inner shift takes place. A sign that doesn't just separate you from illusions or recalibrate your inner world, but directly challenges your sense of identity itself. Almost no one talks about it. Many experience it without realizing what it is. And when it appears, life no longer feels the same. That sign will be revealed in the next chapter. If you feel that these reflections are aligning with something you've been sensing quietly for a long time, consider subscribing, not as a habit, but as a way of staying connected to this unfolding understanding. Because once the deeper sign appears, there is no way to mistake it, and no way to return to who you were before. There is a sign so profound that when it appears, life no longer feels linear. Time bends, meaning deepens, and the question is no longer what is wrong with the world, but who am I beyond it? This sign does not arrive loudly. It does not announce itself with visions or miracles. In fact, many people miss it precisely because it is subtle. But once felt, it is unmistakable. The deepest spiritual sign is this: the collapse of the identity you thought you were. Not a breakdown, a dissolution. You begin to notice that the roles you've played, professional, social, familial, even psychological, start to feel strangely unreal. Not false, but incomplete. As if they were costumes you wore for survival, not expressions of your essence. You still function within them, but something fundamental loosens. Ancient teachings spoke of this moment with reverence and caution. In esoteric Christianity, it was called dying before death. In Eastern traditions, it was the falling away of the false self. Even modern physics brushes against this mystery when it questions whether the observer is separate from what is observed. At this stage, the question is no longer, "Why am I lonely?" It becomes, "Who is the one experiencing loneliness?" And that question changes everything. You may feel moments of profound stillness, followed by waves of unease. You may sense that the boundaries between you and the world are thinner. Emotions arise without clear cause. A quiet compassion replaces judgment. Old ambitions lose their urgency, not because you've failed, but because something deeper is calling. This is not detachment from life. It is detachment from illusion. Schopenhauer touched this truth indirectly when he spoke of the will as a blind force driving existence. But here, something radical happens. You begin to step out of identification with that force. Desire weakens. Comparison fades. The need to prove dissolves. And with that dissolution comes fear. Because the ego, your constructed identity, was never meant to disappear quietly. It resists. It whispers that you're losing motivation, losing direction, losing yourself. But what is actually happening is far more profound. You are discovering the difference between being someone and being aware. This is the sign that almost no one is prepared for, because it doesn't just isolate you socially, it isolates you existentially. You realize that most people are not just distracted, they are identified with thoughts, stories, labels, struggles. And once you see that clearly, you can no longer fully participate in the same way. This is why mystics were often misunderstood, why prophets retreated into deserts, why philosophers embraced solitude. It wasn't rejection of humanity, it was proximity to truth. Midway through this reflection, let me say something important. If this content resonates with you, if you feel that it's speaking to something deep and unspoken inside you, consider subscribing and liking the video. Not because of algorithms or profit, but because this channel exists to explore these questions with honesty and care. Every like and subscription strengthens a quiet community built on depth, not noise. Now, back to the revelation. At this stage, solitude becomes sacred, not empty, not cold, but spacious. You no longer feel alone in the same way, because you are no longer constantly negotiating your existence through others. There is a subtle joy here, a calm that does not depend on circumstances. And yet, there is also a great responsibility. Because once identity loosens, you face a choice. Do you retreat completely, dissolving into inner silence? Or do you return to the world, carrying this awareness gently, without forcing it on others? This is where the deepest tension lives. The world still demands roles. The mind still produces thoughts. Life still unfolds. But now, you are no longer fully trapped inside it. You stand slightly behind yourself, witnessing. This is awakening, not as fantasy, but as burden and blessing. And here is the unsettling truth few dare to say aloud. Once this sign appears, life will ask something of you. Not belief, not obedience, but integration. The final question is not whether you are awake, but what you will do with that awareness. And that question is where everything truly begins. If you've stayed until now, it's not by accident. Something in you recognized this path. Not as theory, not as entertainment, but as memory. Because everything we explored here was never meant to be learned for the first time. It was meant to be remembered. The solitude, the discomfort with noise, the strange clarity that arrives when illusions fall away, the subtle collapse of the identity you once defended. These are not signs of failure. They are not symptoms of being broken, antisocial, or lost. They are signals of awakening. Awakening doesn't arrive as light alone. It arrives as friction, as distance, as the quiet realization that the life you were trained to want no longer satisfies the part of you that has begun to see. And that realization can feel frightening, because it removes easy answers, but it is also profoundly honest. You were never meant to disappear into the crowd. You were meant to see it. Every sign we discussed points to the same invitation: to live more consciously, more slowly, more truthfully, not above others, not against the world, but anchored within yourself. This journey does not demand perfection. It does not ask you to abandon your life, your work, or your relationships. It asks for something subtler and braver: presence, discernment, responsibility for your own awareness. The world will continue to rush. Noise will continue to multiply. Illusions will continue to offer comfort in exchange for your attention. But once you've seen through them, you are no longer obligated to give yourself away. Solitude, when understood, is not emptiness. It is space. And space is where consciousness learns to breathe. If there is one thing to take with you, let it be this: you are not alone in this experience, even when it feels that way. There are others who walk quietly, who question deeply, who feel the same tension between clarity and belonging. Some are alive now. Some left their traces in books, art, music, and thought. And some are watching this video alongside you, feeling the same quiet recognition. This channel exists for that reason: not to persuade, not to convert, but to gather those who sense that life holds more depth than we are usually allowed to explore. If you feel called to continue this reflection, consider subscribing. Not as a click, but as a small commitment to your own awareness. And if this video resonated, give it a like. It helps this work reach others who may be searching silently, just as you once were. I'd also love to make this space more human, more connected. Leave a comment with your name and the city you're watching from. Your presence matters here, and I'll be reading them carefully. Some of you will be personally acknowledged in future reflections. And now, a final thought to leave hanging in the silence. Perhaps intelligence was never meant to make you fit in. Perhaps it was meant to make you see. And once you truly see, nothing inside you can ever pretend again.